The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the city streets, its heat radiating off the cracked pavement in shimmering waves. The cacophony of urban life filled every corner, car horns blaring in frustration, traffic police whistling urgently at intersections, street vendors calling out their wares in melodious yet persistent voices, and the ever-present dust that hung in the air like a thin veil over reality. It was an ordinary day in the capital, the kind where life moved at a frenetic pace, and nobody had time to notice the person sitting next to them. In the midst of this chaotic symphony, a solitary figure sat hunched on the edge of the sidewalk. His clothes were worn and faded, the kind that spoke of years of hard labor and economic struggle. His head remained bowed as if trying to remain invisible to the passing world. Before him sat a small wooden box, its surface scratched and weathered by time. Inside lay the simple tools of his trade, brushes of various sizes, tins of black and brown polish, thick threads for stitching, and a small bottle of adhesive. He was mending shoes, a profession as old as civilization itself, yet one that had become nearly invisible in the modern world. Pedestrians hurried past without so much as a glance in his direction. Office workers in pressed suits, students with backpacks, mothers pulling children along, all were too absorbed in their own worlds to notice the cobbler. They couldn't possibly imagine that this seemingly insignificant man was actually President Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of their nation, who had disguised himself to conduct a covert mission among his people. Ibrahim had always believed in a philosophy that set him apart from other leaders. He refused to govern from an ivory tower, relying solely on sanitized reports and statistics. Instead, he periodically descended from his position of power to experience firsthand the reality of life for ordinary citizens. This time, he had assumed the identity of a disabled craftsman, complete with cloth wrapped around his legs to simulate an injury and a walking stick that leaned against the wall beside him. To the world, he was nobody, just another struggling worker trying to earn a day's wages. But in truth, he was an eagle watching from the shadows, observing everything with keen, analytical eyes. The heat intensified as noon approached, but Ibrahim continued his work with practiced hands. His fingers moved with surprising skill as he stitched an old leather shoe, the needle piercing through the tough material with precision. It was a skill he had learned specifically for this disguise, spending weeks practicing until his movements looked as natural as those of a master cobbler. Around him, rickshaw drivers and day laborers gathered in small clusters, sharing cigarettes and complaints about the economy, their wages, and the government. His government. Ibrahim listened carefully to every word, every grumble, every joke. His ears had become finely tuned instruments, picking up not just the words but the emotions behind them. He knew from experience that the greatest conspiracies often hid in casual conversations, and the truth about a nation's health could be found in the unfiltered complaints of its working class. The afternoon wore on, and Ibrahim's back began to ache from the uncomfortable position. Yet he remained focused, his hands continuing their work even as his mind cataloged everything he observed. He watched how police officers treated street vendors, how shopkeepers inflated prices when they thought no one was looking, how women navigated the streets with caution, always alert to potential threats. These were the realities that never made it into official reports. Suddenly, the ambient noise of the street changed. The usual cacophony was interrupted by a different sound, the slapping of bare feet on hot pavement running at full speed. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned in unison. What they saw left them stunned into silence. A bride was running down the street, a vision in white traditional wedding attire, her elaborately embroidered dress billowing behind her as she ran. Her face was streaked with tears, mascara running in dark rivulets down her cheeks. Her jewelry caught the sunlight, heavy gold necklaces, elaborate earrings, and bangles that jingled with each desperate stride. But most striking was her expression, a mixture of terror, determination, and something that looked like liberation. In her clenched fist, she held something that glinted gold, a ring. The crowd watched in shocked silence as she ran past them. Some people pulled out their phones to record the spectacle, while others simply stared with open mouths. Street vendors forgot their sales pitches. Even the traffic seemed to slow down, as if the entire city had paused to witness this extraordinary scene. The bride ran straight toward Ibrahim's spot on the sidewalk. For a moment their eyes met, his calm and observant, hers wild with emotion. Without breaking stride, she hurled the golden ring to the ground with force. It hit the pavement with a sharp metallic clink, bounced once, then rolled in a perfect arc before coming to rest directly in front of Ibrahim's worn shoes. The ring spun for a few seconds, catching the light before finally settling. In that brief moment, Ibrahim saw intricate engravings on its surface, symbols that looked both ornate and ominous. Before anyone could react or ask questions, the bride had already flagged down a passing taxi. She yanked open the door, threw herself inside, and the vehicle sped away, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and a street full of bewildered witnesses. The noise of the city gradually resumed, but with a different quality now: hushed conversations, speculation and gossip spreading like wildfire. People gathered in small groups, recreating the scene, offering theories about who the bride was and why she was running. Some laughed nervously. Others looked concerned. A few took photos of the spot where the ring had fallen, as if documenting the site of some historic event. Ibrahim remained still, his face betraying nothing. But inside, every instinct he had developed over years of leadership was alerting him to danger. A bride didn't run like that without good reason. A ring, clearly expensive, clearly significant, wasn't discarded on a public street without meaning. This wasn't just a personal drama. It was a mystery that demanded investigation. Slowly, deliberately, he reached down and picked up the ring. It was heavier than it looked, made of solid gold with intricate engravings that formed a pattern he didn't immediately recognize. He wrapped it carefully in a piece of cloth from his toolkit and tucked it into his pocket. His weathered hands resumed their work on the shoe, but his mind was already racing ahead. This story isn't over, he thought to himself. This is just the beginning. That night, Ibrahim couldn't sleep. He had returned to his simple rented room. Part of his disguise included living as his character would live, and sat by the window, turning the ring over in his hands. The gold caught the dim light from the street lamp outside, casting strange shadows on the wall. The ring was clearly expensive, the kind of jewelry that represented not just wealth, but status and power. The engravings on its surface were unusual, not the typical floral patterns or religious symbols one might expect. Instead, they formed what looked like a corporate logo or official seal. There was something institutional about it, something that suggested this ring was more than a mere wedding band. Ibrahim's mind replayed the scene over and over. The bride's expression had been complex, not just fear or anger, but something deeper. There had been determination in her eyes, even as tears streamed down her face. She had wanted to get rid of this ring, needed to throw it away publicly, dramatically. That wasn't the action of someone simply ending a relationship. That was the action of someone making a statement, someone trying to free themselves from something oppressive. He thought about the tears, the bare feet, the expensive jewelry she had been wearing. Everything suggested wealth, privilege, a high-status wedding. Yet she had been running as if her life depended on it. Who had she been running from? A controlling family? An abusive husband? Or something even more sinister? As a president, even in disguise, Ibrahim had access to information that ordinary citizens didn't. But he also knew that approaching this mystery through official channels might alert whoever was involved. If this was indeed something more than a personal matter, and his instincts told him it was, then discretion was essential. He decided his course of action. Tomorrow he would return to the same spot and begin asking questions. Someone must have seen where the bride went. Someone might know who she was. The streets had eyes and ears, and in his current disguise, he could access a network of information that was invisible to the powerful. As dawn broke, Ibrahim dressed again in his cobbler's clothes, carefully wrapped his legs, took up his walking stick, and headed out into the morning city. The morning was cooler, with a slight breeze that provided relief from yesterday's oppressive heat. Ibrahim set up his cobbler's station in the exact same spot, arranging his tools with the same care as before. To any observer, he was simply a poor craftsman beginning another day of work. But today his approach was different. Instead of remaining silent, he began engaging with the other street workers, the rickshaw drivers, the tea seller across the street, the newspaper vendor on the corner. He asked casual questions, always leading the conversation gently toward the incident with the running bride. Most people were eager to talk about it. It had been the most exciting thing to happen on this street in months, and everyone had a theory. But concrete information was harder to come by. Nobody seemed to know who the bride was or why she had been running. Finally, as the morning progressed toward noon, Ibrahim struck gold. A taxi driver, an older man with a weathered face and knowing eyes, stopped by to have his shoes polished. As Ibrahim worked, he casually mentioned the running bride. The driver's eyes lit up with recognition. "Ah, yes, I know the driver who picked her up. We had tea together last night, and he couldn't stop talking about it. Said she gave him a huge tip, more money than he usually makes in a week. She asked him to take her to the Atlantic Grand Hotel. You know, that fancy place on the north side where all the rich foreigners stay." Ibrahim's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their work. The Atlantic Grand Hotel. His mind immediately flagged the name. That establishment had appeared in several intelligence reports over the past year, always in connection with suspicious activities, potential money laundering, and meetings between local businessmen and foreign agents of questionable origin. "Did your friend mention anything else?" Ibrahim asked, keeping his tone casual, just mildly curious. The driver thought for a moment. He said she looked terrified, but also relieved, like she had escaped from something terrible. When she got out of the taxi, she stood outside the hotel for a long time, just staring at the entrance, as if gathering courage to go in. Ibrahim finished polishing the shoes and accepted his small payment with a grateful nod. As the driver walked away, Ibrahim's mind was already formulating a plan. He needed to get to that hotel, but he had to be careful. If this situation was as serious as he suspected, showing too much interest could be dangerous, not just for him, but for the mysterious bride as well. The Atlantic Grand Hotel stood on the northern edge of the city, where old colonial architecture met modern glass and steel. It was the kind of place where diplomats stayed, where international business deals were negotiated, and where secrets were traded like currency. The lobby alone probably cost more to furnish than most people earned in a lifetime. Ibrahim knew he couldn't simply walk through the front door, not in his current disguise. The security would throw him out immediately, possibly with unnecessary force. He needed a different approach. He spent the afternoon observing the hotel from various vantage points, always maintaining his character as a simple cobbler. He set up his station on a corner near the hotel's side entrance, where delivery trucks came and went, and where hotel staff took their smoking breaks. From this position, he had a clear view of everyone entering and leaving. He noted the expensive cars, the well-dressed guests, the careful security presence that tried to be discreet, but was obvious to his trained eye. Everything about the place screamed power and money, and the kind of privacy that people paid premium prices to maintain. As the afternoon wore on, Ibrahim struck up conversations with some of the hotel's lower-level staff, the drivers who waited for their employers, the maintenance workers, the kitchen staff coming out for cigarettes. These were his people now, at least in his current identity, and they spoke to him more freely than they ever would to someone in a suit. One young maintenance worker, barely out of his teens, was particularly talkative. "This place," he said, shaking his head, "you wouldn't believe what goes on here. They pay us well enough to keep quiet, but everyone knows. Late-night meetings, foreign businessmen who don't speak our language, locked conference rooms where even the cleaning staff isn't allowed." "Sounds mysterious," Ibrahim said, his hands working on a shoe but his attention fully focused. "Last night was especially strange," the young man continued. "A woman came in, dressed like a bride, can you believe it? Barefoot, crying, looked like she'd been running. The manager himself came down to meet her, which never happens. They took her up to the executive floor, and she didn't come down all night. This morning, there were these men, foreign, wearing expensive suits, going in and out of her room. Ibrahim felt a chill run down his spine despite the afternoon heat. This was bigger than he'd thought. The bride wasn't just a wealthy woman with relationship problems. She was connected to something significant, something that involved international players and required the personal attention of the hotel's top management. The next morning brought a development that Ibrahim hadn't anticipated. He had set up his cobbler's station in the usual spot when a black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. The door opened and out stepped the bride, though she looked nothing like the desperate woman who had run through the streets 2 days ago. She was dressed simply now, in a modest blue business suit that was elegant without being ostentatious. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She wore minimal jewelry, but Ibrahim recognized her immediately. The same face, the same eyes, though now they showed determination rather than fear. She walked directly toward him, carrying a small bag in her hand. The street workers and passers-by stopped to stare. What was a woman like that doing approaching a street cobbler? She sat down on the low wall next to his station, seemingly oblivious to the attention she was attracting. From the bag, she pulled out a container of food, expensive restaurant food, the kind that came with cloth napkins and actual silverware. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly, not looking at him directly. "For the other day, for the commotion, for dropping that ring in front of you." Ibrahim continued his work, not looking up. "You don't owe me an apology, daughter. Everyone has their struggles. That ring," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "it wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of everything I was trying to escape. When you picked it up and brought it back to the hotel yesterday, I realized that you weren't just being kind. You were trying to understand." Ibrahim did look up then, meeting her eyes. She was testing him, he realized, seeing if he was just a simple cobbler or something more. "What I saw," Ibrahim said carefully, "was someone who needed to be free of something heavy. Gold can be the heaviest burden of all." Her eyes widened slightly. That simple phrase had told her he understood more than his appearance suggested. She glanced around, checking if anyone was listening too closely. "My name is Ayanda," she said. "I'm the owner of Banjo Leathers Company. The world sees me as successful, wealthy, independent. But the truth is, I'm trapped." Ibrahim set down the shoe he had been working on and gave her his full attention. "Tell me," he said simply, and so she did. Sitting there on a busy street corner, surrounded by the noise of traffic and commerce, Ayanda told her story to a man she believed to be a simple cobbler. Never knowing she was actually confessing to the president of the nation, Ayanda's story poured out in fragments, each piece more disturbing than the last. Banjo Leathers, she explained, had been her family's company for 3 generations. It had started as a small workshop making handcrafted leather goods and had grown into one of the country's most successful exports, known internationally for quality and craftsmanship. But 5 years ago, everything changed. Foreign investors had approached them with what seemed like an incredible opportunity: access to international markets, modern equipment, expansion possibilities. Her father, who was running the company then, had been hesitant but ultimately agreed to a partnership. That's when the nightmare began. "The investors weren't interested in leather goods," Ayanda said, her voice trembling. "They wanted access to our shipping routes, our customs clearances, our legitimate business reputation. Within a year, my father discovered they were using our company to smuggle money out of the country. When he threatened to expose them, he died in what the police called an accident." Ibrahim felt his jaw tighten. He had seen many such accidents in intelligence reports, convenient deaths that cleaned up loose ends. "I inherited the company," Ayanda continued, "and with it, I inherited the cage. They gave me a choice: cooperate and live wealthy, or resist and end up like my father. They have evidence, forged documents, that could make it look like I've been complicit all along. If I go to the police, I go to prison." "And the wedding?" Ibrahim asked. "That was their latest plan. They wanted me to marry one of their associates, a man named Marcus Delacroix. He's French officially, but no one really knows where he's from. The marriage would have given them legal rights to the company, made everything official. The ring I threw away was his, engraved with the symbol of their organization. Wearing it meant I accepted their terms. So you ran. I ran, she confirmed. I don't know what I was thinking. I just knew that if I went through with that wedding, there would be no escape ever again. But now... She looked around nervously. They're not going to let this go. They've invested too much in this plan. Ibrahim was quiet for a moment, processing everything she had told him. This wasn't just one woman's problem. If what she said was true, and he believed it was, then this was a systematic corruption that touched international finance, local politics, customs services, and possibly law enforcement. The kind of conspiracy that could only exist with protection at very high levels. You said you can't go to the police, Ibrahim said carefully. But what if you could go higher? Ayanda laughed bitterly. Higher? Who do you think protects them? These people have connections everywhere. They know which officials to pay off, which judges to blackmail. Going higher just means falling further. Ibrahim said nothing, but his mind was racing. He had spent his entire presidency fighting corruption, but he was beginning to realize that some rot ran deeper than he had known. If he revealed his identity now, would Ayanda trust him? Would she believe that the president himself was different from all the other officials she assumed were compromised? No, he decided, not yet. First, he needed evidence. He needed to see the full extent of this operation. Only then could he strike in a way that would actually make a difference. I can help you, he said finally. But you have to trust me. Who are you really? Ayanda asked, looking at him intently. Someone who cares about the truth, Ibrahim answered. And someone who has seen that real power doesn't come from an office or a title. It comes from courage and the willingness to stand up when everyone else wants to hide. Ayanda studied his face for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. What do we do? Ibrahim's plan was simple but risky. He would infiltrate Banjo Leathers himself in his cobbler disguise. Ayanda would introduce him as a new hire, a disabled craftsman she had taken pity on, someone who could do small repairs and maintenance work. It would give him access to the company premises and the opportunity to investigate. When Ibrahim arrived at the Banjo Leathers headquarters the next morning, he was struck by the contrast between the company's public face and what Ayanda had described. The building was modern and impressive, with a gleaming glass facade and the company logo, a stylized leather boot, prominently displayed. Inside, the lobby was all polished marble and expensive art. The receptionist looked at him with barely disguised disgust as he shuffled in with his walking stick. "Deliveries are in the back," she said curtly. "He's with me." Ayanda's voice came from the elevator. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, every inch the successful CEO. "This is Mr. Ibrahim. He'll be doing some maintenance work for us." The receptionist's eyebrows shot up, but she said nothing. As Ayanda led Ibrahim through the facility, he could feel the stares, hear the whispered comments. Some employees were simply curious. Others were openly mocking. In the break room, he overheard a conversation between two young designers. "Did you see the new guy Ayanda brought in? Looks like she's running a charity now instead of a business." Another employee laughed. "Maybe he's going to teach us the ancient art of shoe repair. You know, get back to our roots." The jokes continued throughout the day. Someone posted his picture in a company group chat with the caption, "Our new creative director." It got dozens of laughing emojis. Ibrahim endured it all without reaction, maintaining his character perfectly. But he was also observing everything. He noted which employees seemed genuinely busy with legitimate work and which ones spent most of their time in hushed conversations or locked offices. He observed the security protocols, the entry and exit patterns, the way certain areas of the building were off limits even to regular staff. Most importantly, he identified the key players in the conspiracy. There was Derek Mbala, the CFO, who was always on his phone speaking in languages Ibrahim didn't recognize. There was Sarah Chen, supposedly a marketing consultant, who had an office but never seemed to actually do any marketing. And then there were the foreign visitors. Men in expensive suits who came and went without signing in, going directly to the executive floor. By the end of his first day, Ibrahim had a mental map of the entire operation. But he needed hard evidence, documents, records, proof that would hold up in court and couldn't be explained away. That night, when most of the staff had left, Ibrahim made his move. The building was quiet, except for the hum of air conditioning and the occasional footsteps of the night security guard making his rounds. Ibrahim had timed the guard's pattern carefully. He had 12 minutes between rounds to get into the records room, find what he needed, and get out. The lock on the records room door was supposed to be sophisticated, but Ibrahim had spent weeks learning lockpicking as part of his disguise training. His hands that signed laws and international treaties, now held delicate picks that probed the mechanism with patient precision. The lock clicked open. Inside, the records room was exactly what he had expected: rows of filing cabinets, stacks of boxes, and a single computer terminal that probably contained the digital archives. Ibrahim moved quickly but carefully, using a small flashlight he had tucked in his pocket. He started with the physical files, pulling out folders marked with dates that corresponded to when Ayanda said the foreign investment began. What he found was damning: shipping manifests that didn't match production records, invoices for materials that were never purchased, customs declarations that cleared shipments with impossibly vague descriptions. But it was what he found hidden behind a false back in one of the filing cabinets that truly shocked him. A ledger, handwritten detailing actual cash flows, numbers that made his breath catch. Millions, tens of millions, being moved through Banjo Leathers every month. The company's legitimate business was tiny compared to the money laundering operation it had become. And there, on several key documents, was a symbol he recognized. The same symbol that had been engraved on the ring Ayanda had thrown away. It was a corporate logo, yes, but it also represented something more: a signature, a mark of ownership. Ibrahim was photographing documents with a small camera when he heard voices outside the door. He froze, his heart pounding. The security guard wasn't due back for another 8 minutes. Who was this? He ducked behind a filing cabinet as the door opened and 2 men entered, foreign men speaking in accented English. "The shipment arrives Thursday," one said. "Same arrangements as before. The customs agent knows to approve it without inspection." "And the girl?" the other asked. "Ayanda, is she back in line?" "For now, but she's unpredictable. The boss thinks we may need to take more direct action soon." Meaning we've been patient, but patience has limits. Her father learned that lesson. She may need to learn it too. Ibrahim's hands clenched into fists. They were casually discussing murdering Ayanda as if it were just another business decision. He wanted to step out from behind the cabinet, to confront them, to use the authority of his office to have them arrested immediately. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not here. That would blow his cover and potentially alert the entire organization. He needed to be smart, to be patient, even though every instinct screamed at him to act. The men spent a few more minutes reviewing some files, then left as casually as they had entered. Ibrahim waited a full 5 minutes after their footsteps faded before emerging from his hiding place. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. He quickly finished photographing the documents he needed, then carefully replaced everything exactly as he had found it. The security guard would be back in 3 minutes. Ibrahim slipped out of the records room, relocked the door, and made his way back to the small maintenance closet that served as his office during his cover. That night, reviewing the evidence on his hidden laptop, Ibrahim Traoré, the president, returned. He looked at what Ibrahim the cobbler had discovered and knew that the game was about to change. He now had enough evidence to bring down not just the conspiracy at Banjo Leathers, but potentially an entire international money laundering network. But he also knew that these people were dangerous, that they had killed before and would kill again. Ayanda was in immediate danger, and any misstep could cost her life. He had to act soon. But he also had to act perfectly. The next day, Ayanda called an emergency board meeting. It was, she told everyone, to discuss the company's future direction and to address some concerns about recent financial irregularities. Everyone required to attend: board members, senior management, the foreign consultants, and key investors. What none of them knew was that this meeting had been carefully planned by Ibrahim. It was time to bring everything into the light. The conference room was impressive. A long mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. As people filed in, Ibrahim entered too, pushing a maintenance cart. Several people gave him annoyed looks. "Does he have to be here?" Derek Mbala, the CFO, asked irritably. "The air conditioning has been acting up," Ayanda said calmly. "I asked him to check it during the meeting." "Is that a problem?" It was a calculated move. Ibrahim positioned himself in the corner where he could see and hear everything while appearing to be just part of the furniture. Invisible, beneath notice. The meeting began with standard business talk, quarterly reports, market trends, production schedules. Ibrahim continued to tinker with the air conditioning vent, taking his time, watching everyone. Then Ayanda dropped her bomb. "I want to discuss our relationship with Delacroix International," she said, her voice steady. "Specifically, I want to know why we're moving more money than products." The room went silent. Ibrahim saw several people exchange quick glances. Marcus Delacroix himself, the man Ayanda was supposed to marry, leaned back in his chair with a cold smile. "I'm not sure what you mean," Delacroix said smoothly. "Our partnership has been extremely profitable for Banjo Leathers." "Profitable for someone," Ayanda agreed. "But not for my company, and certainly not for our country. I have evidence of systematic money laundering, fraudulent shipping manifests, and bribery of customs officials." "Those are serious accusations," Derek Mbala said, his voice hard. "Do you have any proof, or is this just hysteria?" "I have proof," Ayanda said. She nodded toward Ibrahim. Everyone turned to look at the maintenance worker in the corner. Ibrahim slowly straightened up, setting down his tools. He reached up and removed the fake beard that had been part of his disguise, then the colored contact lenses that had changed his eye color. He stood to his full height, no longer hunched, no longer leaning on a cane. The transformation was stunning. In seconds, the lowly cobbler had become something entirely different, someone who commanded attention, who radiated authority. But people in the room still didn't recognize him. They saw a man well-built and confident, but nobody they knew. "Who are you?" Delacroix demanded, half rising from his seat. Ibrahim walked to the head of the table and picked up a remote control. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he said. He pressed a button, and the large screen on the wall lit up. Not with a business presentation, but with an official presidential portrait of himself. The room erupted in chaos. Several people jumped to their feet. Derek Mbala went pale. Sarah Chen grabbed her phone, then seemed to realize there was no one she could call who could help her now. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ibrahim said, his voice cutting through the noise, "I am President Ibrahim Traoré. For the past week, I have been investigating allegations of corruption and money laundering centered on this company. What I have found is worse than I imagined." He clicked through the images on the screen, photographs of the documents he had found, bank records, shipping manifests, the handwritten ledger. Each image was a nail in their coffin. "I have documented evidence of international money laundering totaling over $50 million in the past year alone," Ibrahim continued. "I have proof of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." "This is absurd," Delacroix shouted, finding his voice. "You can't possibly believe—" "I don't believe," Ibrahim interrupted. "I know. I witnessed conversations about eliminating obstacles. I heard you discuss bribing officials. And I have the testimony of Ayanda herself about how you murdered her father and attempted to force her into marriage to legitimize your criminal enterprise." At a signal from Ibrahim, armed security personnel entered the room, not company security, but Presidential Guard, along with agents from the National Intelligence Service. They had been waiting in an adjacent room, listening to everything. Marcus Delacroix, Derek Mbala, Sarah Chen, and 4 others, Ibrahim said, reading from a list. "You are under arrest for money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder." The arrests happened quickly. Delacroix tried to argue, invoking diplomatic immunity and threatening international incidents. Derek Mbala attempted to run but was stopped at the door. Sarah Chen just sat silently, staring at the table. Within minutes, they were all in custody, and the room was suddenly very quiet. Ayanda, who had been standing to the side during all of this, finally spoke. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes brimming with tears. Ibrahim turned to her. "You should thank yourself. If you hadn't had the courage to run, to throw away that ring, to refuse to be part of their scheme, none of this would have been possible. You saved your company and probably your life." "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild," Ibrahim said. "Your company will be thoroughly audited. The legitimate business will continue under proper oversight. The criminal operations will be dismantled, and you'll have a chance to run Banjo Leathers the way your family intended, as a real business that employs people and creates value, not as a front for criminals." He looked around the conference room, at the expensive furniture and the view of the city. "And I'll remember," he said quietly, "that the most important things I learned as president, I learned while pretending to be the least important person in the room." 3 months later, Ibrahim stood in his actual office in the presidential palace, looking out at the same city he had observed from a sidewalk corner. The view was better here, certainly. He could see the entire capital spread out before him. But he wondered if the understanding was better. The conspiracy at Banjo Leathers had unraveled like a thread pulled from a tapestry. Dozens of arrests had followed: corrupt customs officials, bribed police officers, complicit politicians. The international investigation had expanded to 3 countries. It would be years before all the legal proceedings were complete. Ayanda had been true to her word. She had cooperated fully with investigators, providing testimony and documentation that helped build airtight cases. She had also restructured her company, bringing in independent auditors and implementing transparency measures that became a model for other businesses. She had visited Ibrahim at the palace once, bringing with her a gift: a pair of handmade leather shoes crafted by her company's artisans. For the president who wasn't too proud to sit on the street, she had said, Ibrahim kept those shoes in his office as a reminder, but the most unexpected consequence of his undercover mission was how it changed his approach to governance. He now insisted that his cabinet ministers spend time in similar disguises, experiencing life as their citizens lived it. Some resisted, calling it beneath their dignity. Those, Ibrahim quietly moved to different positions. He increased funding for street-level workers, improved protections for whistleblowers, and created direct channels for citizens to report corruption without going through compromised intermediaries. And once a month, without announcement or security detail, Ibrahim would slip out of the palace in disguise and spend a day on the streets, sometimes as a cobbler, sometimes as a taxi driver, sometimes as a street vendor. His security team hated it. His chief of staff worried constantly. But Ibrahim insisted. "I am the president of the people," he would say, "and I can't serve people I don't understand." The golden ring, the one Ayanda had thrown away, sat now in a secure evidence locker, waiting to be used in trials. But its real value wasn't as evidence. It was as a symbol of how power corrupts, how money can trap even the wealthy, and how sometimes the smallest actions, throwing away a ring, picking it up, asking questions, can bring down empires of corruption. Years later, when historians wrote about President Ibrahim Traoré's administration, they would point to the Banjo Leathers case as the turning point, the moment when the fight against corruption became personal, visceral, and effective. They would analyze his unorthodox methods and debate whether a president should take such risks. But they couldn't deny the results. The ring had changed everything. In the weeks following the arrests at Banjo Leathers, Ibrahim discovered that the conspiracy ran even deeper than he had imagined. The intelligence services, now operating with his direct oversight and freed from corrupt influences, began pulling on threads that unraveled across multiple sectors. Banjo Leathers hadn't been an isolated case. It was one node in a vast network. The same symbol that had been engraved on the ring, a stylized infinity loop intertwined with a crown, appeared in the records of 17 other companies across the nation. Construction firms that won government contracts through rigged bids, import-export businesses that existed only on paper, real estate companies that bought properties with money whose origins couldn't be traced. All of them were connected to the same international criminal syndicate. one that had been slowly infiltrating the nation's economy for over a decade. "It's like discovering you have cancer," Ibrahim told his trusted intelligence chief, Director Amara Okonkwo, during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "You think you're treating a sore throat, and then you realize the infection has spread everywhere." Director Okonkwo spread out photographs and documents across the conference table. The Delacroix organization, that's what they call themselves, though Marcus Delacroix is just one of their operatives, they've been operating in 12 African nations. "We're coordinating with Interpol now, but Mr. President, this is going to get worse before it gets better." "Explain," Ibrahim said, though he suspected he already knew. "These people didn't build this network without help from inside the government. They couldn't have. Every customs clearance, every overlooked audit, every sealed investigation, someone in authority made those things happen. When we start prosecuting the foreign criminals, we're going to have to prosecute our own people too. High-ranking people." Ibrahim was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good, that's exactly what we'll do. Draft a speech for me. I want to address the nation tomorrow night." "What will you say?" "The truth," Ibrahim replied. "All of it." The presidential address was scheduled for prime time, and the nation tuned in with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Rumors had been swirling for weeks about massive arrests, about foreign conspiracies, about corruption at the highest levels. Now finally the president would speak. Ibrahim appeared on screen not in the formal setting of the presidential office, but in a simpler room, seated in a plain chair. He wore a simple suit, nice but not ostentatious. His expression was serious but not grim. "My fellow citizens," he began, "I need to tell you a story. It begins with a running bride and a golden ring, and it ends with a truth that we must face together." For the next 40 minutes, Ibrahim laid out everything. He explained his undercover mission, showed footage of himself in disguise working as a cobbler. He detailed the conspiracy at Banjo Leathers and then expanded to explain the broader network that had been uncovered. But most importantly, he named names. "I will not hide behind vague references to certain officials or unnamed sources," he said, looking directly into the camera. "The people deserve to know exactly who betrayed their trust." He then listed 23 government officials, from low-level customs agents to 2 members of parliament and 1 deputy minister, who had been arrested in connection with the conspiracy. For each one, he presented evidence, not detailed enough to compromise legal proceedings, but sufficient to show that these weren't baseless accusations. Some of you watching may be thinking, "How could our president work as a cobbler? Isn't that beneath the dignity of the office?" Ibrahim continued. "To you, I say, the dignity of my office comes from serving you faithfully, not from sitting in a palace and pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I needed to see what you see. I needed to hear what you hear. I needed to understand how corruption doesn't just steal money. It steals hope, opportunity, and faith in the future. And I can only fight what I truly understand." He paused, letting that sink in. "In the coming months, there will be more arrests. There will be trials that capture headlines. There will be people you trusted who will disappoint you. This will be painful, but it is necessary pain, the pain of cleaning a wound so that it can heal properly. I make you this promise. No one is above the law. Not foreign investors with money and connections. Not local business people with friends in high places. And not government officials, regardless of their rank or position. Justice will be blind, but it will not be silent." The address ended with Ibrahim making a direct appeal to citizens. If you have evidence of corruption, come forward. If you have been pressured to participate in illegal schemes, come forward. We have established protected channels for reporting, and I personally guarantee that whistleblowers will be safeguarded. He held up a worn leather shoe, one of the pair Ayanda had given him. This shoe was made by honest workers at Banjo Leathers, a company that was nearly destroyed by criminals but is now being rebuilt by people who care about craftsmanship and integrity. This is what we're fighting for, the right of honest people to do honest work and build honest lives. Thank you, and good night. The address had an immediate and dramatic effect. Within hours, the secure reporting channels were flooded with tips, some credible, some not. 3 more government officials resigned before they could be arrested. International media picked up the story, and suddenly the world was watching, but not everyone was pleased. 2 days after the address, Ibrahim received a delegation from the business community. They were led by industrialist Harold Mensah, a man whose wealth and influence had made him virtually untouchable for decades. "Mr. President," Mensah said, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "your publicity stunt has created significant uncertainty in the business community. Investors are nervous. The stock market has dropped 11%. This instability is bad for everyone." Ibrahim studied the man carefully. Mensah's name hadn't appeared in any of the evidence yet, but Ibrahim's instincts told him that absence was suspicious in itself. "What you call instability, Mr. Mensah, I call accountability. If the stock market is dropping because criminals are being arrested, then perhaps it was overvalued to begin with." "You're being naive," another businessman interjected, a Chinese textile magnate named Wei Chen. "Business requires flexibility, requires relationships, requires understanding that sometimes rules need to be interpreted contextually." "You mean bent?" Ibrahim said flatly. "Or broken? And no, Mr. Chen, I don't accept that premise. I've seen where flexible rules lead. They lead to companies like Banjo Leathers being hijacked by criminals. They lead to hard-working people losing their livelihoods while foreign syndicates get rich. That ends now." The meeting grew heated. The business leaders made thinly veiled threats about capital flight, about moving operations to other countries, about the economic consequences of Ibrahim's radical approach. Ibrahim listened patiently until they were finished. Then he stood up. "Gentlemen, let me be very clear. If your business model requires corruption to survive, then I don't want your business in this country. If you can only make money by breaking laws and bribing officials, then you're not investors, you're parasites. And this nation will be healthier without you." "You can't afford to lose us," Mensah blustered. "Actually," Ibrahim said with a slight smile, "I think we can't afford to keep you. This meeting is over. Thank you for coming." After they left, Director Okonkwo, who had been present throughout, shook her head in amazement. "You just told some of the richest men in the country to leave. You realize they'll fight back?" "Of course they will," Ibrahim said. "Which is why I want your team to start looking very carefully at Harold Mensah's business operations. A man doesn't get that defensive unless he's hiding something." While Ibrahim dealt with the political and economic fallout, Ayanda was on her own journey of transformation. Banjo Leathers was hers again, truly hers, but it was also a shell of what it had been. The criminal operation had been the company's main activity for years. The legitimate leather goods business had been allowed to atrophy, sustained only as a cover story. She had to rebuild from almost nothing. "I've got 47 employees left," she told Ibrahim during one of their periodic check-ins. They met sometimes at the palace, but more often at a small cafe in the city where she could speak freely without feeling overwhelmed by the formality of presidential offices. Out of 300, most of them were just part of the criminal infrastructure. The ones who remain are scared, unsure if they even have jobs. "What are you going to do?" Ibrahim asked. "Start over," Ayanda said simply. "Go back to basics. We're going to make the best leather goods in Africa. No shortcuts, no tricks, just quality craftsmanship. It's going to take years to rebuild our reputation, years to become profitable again. But at least it will be real." She paused, stirring her coffee. "You know what's strange? I have less money now than I did before. The company is worth a fraction of what it was on paper. I had to sell my house, my cars, most of my jewelry. By every conventional measure, I've lost almost everything." "But?" Ibrahim prompted, sensing there was more. "But I can sleep at night," she finished, her eyes bright. "For the first time in 5 years, I can sleep without nightmares. I'm not looking over my shoulder. I'm not wondering if I'll end up like my father. And every shoe that leaves our workshop now is something I can be proud of, not ashamed of. That's worth more than all the money I lost." Ibrahim smiled. "You're going to be fine, Ayanda." "Better than fine, I hope so. I hired someone actually that I think you'd appreciate. Remember that young guy from the maintenance staff at the hotel? The one who told you about the mysterious meetings?" Ibrahim nodded. "His name is James. Turns out he's actually a talented designer. He had been working maintenance because no one would give him a chance based on his resume. No formal education, grew up in the slums. But he's got an incredible eye for design, and he understands leatherwork instinctively. I made him my head of product development." "That's wonderful," Ibrahim said. "He reminds me a little of you, actually," Ayanda said with a slight smile. "He says real talent doesn't need fancy credentials. It just needs opportunity and hard work. He's designing a new line right now, contemporary pieces that blend traditional craftsmanship with modern aesthetics. If it works, it could be our breakthrough." "I'd like to see them when they're ready," Ibrahim said. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I'd like to name the line after you, the Traoré collection. A tribute to the president who taught me that integrity is worth more than comfort." Ibrahim was genuinely touched. "I'd be honored, but only if the shoes are actually good," he added with a grin. Ayanda laughed. "They'll be the best shoes you've ever worn. I guarantee it." 6 months after the initial arrests, the trial of Marcus Delacroix and his co-conspirators began. It was the most high-profile legal proceeding in the nation's history, drawing international media attention and dividing public opinion. Delacroix had hired the best lawyers money could buy, a team of international legal experts who argued that their client was being scapegoated for systemic problems, that the evidence had been obtained through questionable means, the president working undercover without warrants or oversight, and that this was essentially a political prosecution. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day, the courtroom was packed with journalists, observers, and citizens who had managed to secure one of the limited public seats. Security was intense. There had been threats, rumors of bribes offered to jurors, even whispers of planned violence. Ibrahim attended the trial every single day, sitting in the back of the courtroom watching proceedings. His security team hated it, but he insisted. "I started this," he told them. "I'm going to see it through." The prosecution's case was built on the evidence Ibrahim had gathered, supplemented by testimony from dozens of witnesses, including Ayanda, former employees who had been coerced into participating, and even some members of the conspiracy who had agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. The most dramatic moment came when Ayanda took the stand. She appeared calm and professional in a simple business suit, her hair pulled back, speaking in a clear, strong voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom. The defense attorney, a British barrister named Nigel Blackwood, attempted to paint her as a willing participant who was now playing the victim. "Ms. Ayanda," Blackwood said in his posh accent, "isn't it true that you personally profited from these arrangements? That your lifestyle was funded by the very activities you now condemn?" "Yes," Ayanda said simply. The courtroom stirred. It wasn't the answer anyone had expected. Blackwood smiled, thinking he'd scored a point. "So you admit that I was a coward?" Ayanda interrupted. "I admit that after they killed my father, I was so terrified that I went along with their demands. I admit that I tried to convince myself that if I just cooperated, eventually they would leave me alone. I admit that I wore their ring and almost married their operative because I couldn't see any other way out." Her voice grew stronger. "But I also admit that I was wrong, that the money and the safety they offered was poison, and that the day I ran from that wedding, barefoot and terrified, was the first honest thing I'd done in years. So yes, Mr. Blackwood, I profited from corruption, and I'm ashamed of that. But at least now I'm telling the truth." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even Blackwood seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "No further questions," he finally said. When the prosecution rested its case, even the defense seemed to recognize they were facing an uphill battle. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses credible, and the paper trail undeniable. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, they found Marcus Delacroix guilty on all counts: money laundering, conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. The same verdict was handed down for Derek Mbala, Sarah Chen, and 7 others. The sentences were severe: 20 years to life for the primary conspirators. Delacroix himself received 30 years without possibility of parole. As the verdicts were read, Ibrahim watched Delacroix's face. The man showed no emotion, just a cold, calculated acceptance. But as he was being led away, he turned and looked directly at Ibrahim. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Delacroix's expression said clearly, "This isn't over. We'll find another way, another country, another opportunity." Ibrahim's expression replied just as clearly, Not here. Not anymore. The conviction of the Delacroix organization had effects that rippled far beyond one courtroom. Within weeks, similar investigations were launched in 4 other African nations where the organization had been operating. Interpol issued international arrest warrants. Banks in Switzerland and Singapore froze accounts. The network that had taken years to build began to crumble. But perhaps more importantly, something shifted in the national consciousness. People began to believe that corruption could actually be fought, that powerful people could actually face consequences, that speaking truth to power might actually change things. The whistleblower channels that Ibrahim had established continued to receive reports. Some were legitimate, some were personal vendettas disguised as corruption complaints, and some were frivolous. But enough were real that a steady stream of investigations and prosecutions followed. Not all were as dramatic as the Banjo Leathers case, but each one mattered. A traffic officer fired for demanding bribes. A procurement official jailed for kickbacks on school supply contracts. A judge removed from the bench for selling verdicts. Each case sent a message. The rules applied to everyone now. Ibrahim also followed through on his promise to have other government officials experience life from different perspectives. His program became known as the Street Initiative, though he privately hated the name. Cabinet ministers spent time working ordinary jobs, not secretly as he had done, but openly, to understand the challenges faced by their citizens. The Minister of Health worked shifts in a public hospital, dealing with supply shortages and overwhelmed staff. The Minister of Education taught classes in an underfunded school. The Minister of Transportation drove a bus through the chaotic city traffic. Some officials embraced the experience and returned with reform proposals. Others clearly just went through the motions, counting down the days until they could return to their comfortable offices. Ibrahim took note of who was who. The program was controversial. Critics called it a publicity stunt, performative rather than substantive. Supporters praised it as innovative leadership. But regardless of opinion, it kept the government connected to reality in a way that few administrations ever achieved. Director Okonkwo's investigation into Harold Mensah took 6 months and led places that surprised even Ibrahim. Mensah was clever, far more clever than Delacroix had been. His corruption was sophisticated, layered, and laundered through so many corporate structures that it was almost invisible. Almost. What finally cracked the case was something small, a pattern in charitable donations. Mensah's foundation gave generously to schools, hospitals, and community centers. He was widely praised as a philanthropist, a model citizen, a man who gave back. But one of the analysts on Okonkwo's team noticed something odd. Many of the organizations receiving donations would, shortly thereafter, award contracts to Mensah's companies, contracts that were overpriced and underdelivered. The donations were essentially bribes, disguised as charity, and they generated contracts worth 10 times what was donated. He's been doing this for 20 years, Okonkwo reported to Ibrahim. We estimate he's extracted over $200 million from public funds through this scheme. And because it's wrapped in charity, no one questioned it. He's the beloved philanthropist who's actually robbing the people he claims to help. Can we prosecute? Ibrahim asked. It's going to be hard. His lawyers will argue that he can't control how organizations that receive his donations behave afterward. They'll say any connection is coincidental. And politically, this is going to be expensive for you. Mensah has friends everywhere, in parliament, in the business community, even in some religious organizations he's funded. Ibrahim was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he said, Do you remember what I did with Delacroix? How I gathered evidence personally? Sir, you're not suggesting I'm not going undercover again if that's what worries you. But I am going to visit Mr. Mensah personally, unannounced. Let's see how the great philanthropist behaves when the president shows up at his door without cameras or press releases. That's highly irregular. Good, Ibrahim said with a slight smile. I've found that regular approaches don't work with irregular people. 3 days later, Ibrahim arrived at Mensah's private estate in an unmarked car with only 2 security officers. The guards at the gate were flustered. They had no protocol for an unannounced presidential visit. Mensah himself appeared at the door of his mansion, clearly surprised but recovering quickly. Mr. President! What an unexpected honor. Please, come in. The house was obscenely opulent, marble everywhere, gold fixtures, art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Each room was a monument to wealth and ego. "We need to talk, Harold," Ibrahim said, dispensing with formality. They sat in a study lined with leather-bound books that Mensa had probably never read. Ibrahim declined, offered refreshments, and got straight to the point. "I know about the donations, Harold. I know about the contracts. I know exactly what you've been doing." Mensa's face remained neutral, but Ibrahim saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I'm a philanthropist. I give to worthy causes. You give to causes that give contracts to your companies. It's bribery with extra steps. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have enough," Ibrahim said. "But I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you a choice." "A choice?" "You can fight this. You can hire lawyers, drag it through courts, turn it into a political circus. Maybe you win, maybe you lose. But either way, your reputation is destroyed, your business empire is exposed for what it is, and you spend years in legal battles." Ibrahim leaned forward. "Or you can do what's right. You can admit what you've done. You can return the money, all of it. You can restructure your foundation to have independent oversight. And you can spend the rest of your life actually helping people instead of exploiting them." Mensa laughed, a short, bitter sound. "And if I choose this second option, I suppose I don't go to jail?" "I can't promise that. But I can promise I'll recommend leniency to prosecutors if you cooperate fully. You'll probably still face consequences, but they'll be measured against your cooperation." "Why offer this?" Mensa asked suspiciously. "Why not just arrest me like you did Delacroix?" "Because you're not Delacroix," Ibrahim said. "He was a foreign criminal who came here to exploit us. You're one of ours. You're a citizen who went wrong, and I still believe in redemption for people who genuinely want it." He stood up. "You have 1 week to decide. If I don't hear from you, the arrest warrant will be issued. If you choose to do the right thing, contact Director Okonkwo directly." As Ibrahim walked out, Mensa called after him. "You really believe in this stuff, don't you? This whole integrity thing. You actually think it matters?" Ibrahim turned back. "Harold, I sat on a street corner for days, dressed as a cobbler, to understand the truth about one company. I saw how corruption poisons everything it touches. So yes, I believe integrity matters. It's the only thing that really does matter." 6 days later, Harold Mensa's lawyer contacted Director Okonkwo. Mensa had chosen to cooperate. The transformation wasn't overnight, and it wasn't complete. Ibrahim knew better than to think that 2 years of reform could undo decades of corruption. But change was visible, tangible, real. Banjo leathers had become profitable again, modestly so, but genuinely. Ayanda's new line of leather goods, including the Traoré collection, had found an international market among consumers who valued craftsmanship and ethical production. The company employed 200 people now, all of them legitimate workers making real products. James, the young designer Ayanda had hired, had become something of a celebrity in the design world. His story, from hotel maintenance worker to head designer, captured imaginations. He was featured in international fashion magazines, and his designs won awards. But he still worked out of the same modest workshop, still insisted on being hands-on with production. "Success hasn't changed you," Ayanda observed one day. James smiled. "Someone once told me that real power comes from character, not from office or wealth. I'm trying to remember that." The broader anti-corruption campaign continued. The conviction rate for corruption cases had increased dramatically. The bureaucracy was slowly being cleaned out. Foreign investment had initially dropped after the Banjo leather scandal, but was now returning. Different investment. From companies that valued stability and rule of law over opportunities for exploitation. Ibrahim's approval ratings were complex. Among younger citizens and the working class, he was hugely popular. Among the business elite and those who had benefited from the old system, he was despised. Among international observers, he was viewed as either a bold reformer or a reckless idealist, depending on their perspective. He had made enemies, powerful ones. There had been threats, protests, even one attempted assassination that his security team thwarted. but he remained committed to the path he had chosen. On the 2-year anniversary of the day Ayanda had run down the street and thrown away her ring, Ibrahim held a small ceremony at the presidential palace. He invited Ayanda, James, the taxi driver who had first pointed him toward the Atlantic Grand Hotel, and a few others whose courage had contributed to exposing the conspiracy. 2 years ago, Ibrahim said to the small group, I was sitting on a sidewalk repairing shoes. I saw something that day that changed everything. A woman brave enough to run from a cage, even when she didn't know where she was running to. That moment reminded me why I wanted to serve in the first place. Not to sit in comfortable offices and sign papers, but to actually see, to actually understand, to actually help. He held up the golden ring, still preserved as evidence, but now being released back to Ayanda. This ring was supposed to represent bondage, a forced marriage that would have legitimized theft and corruption. Instead, it became a symbol of liberation, of what happens when people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. He handed the ring to Ayanda. She took it, looked at it for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She walked to the window, opened it, and dropped the ring into the garden below. Some symbols, she said, don't deserve to be kept, even as reminders. Let it stay in the dirt where it belongs. Everyone laughed, and the gathering took on a celebratory air. Stories were shared, food was enjoyed, and for a few hours, the weight of government and reform lifted. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Ayanda pulled Ibrahim aside. I have something to tell you. I'm opening a school. A school? A vocational school for leatherworking and design. Free tuition for students who couldn't otherwise afford it. I want to create more opportunities like the one I gave James. I want young people to learn that they can build real careers through honest craftsmanship. Ibrahim smiled broadly. That's wonderful, Ayanda. Have you thought about funding? Some of it will come from company profits. But I was hoping... She hesitated. I was hoping the government might support it too. Not with a large grant, just recognition. Maybe help connecting graduates with other businesses that need skilled workers. Consider it done, Ibrahim said. And I want to visit when it opens. Maybe even teach a class. You? Teach leatherworking? I'm probably rusty, Ibrahim admitted. But I learned the basics pretty well during my time undercover. And I think it would send the right message that no honest work is beneath anyone, including a president. As Ayanda left, Director Okonkwo approached. Sir, I need to brief you on something. It's about the international investigation into the Delacroix organization. What's happened? They've traced connections to 7 other countries now. The network was even larger than we thought, and... She paused. They found evidence linking back to officials in our previous administration. High-level officials. Ibrahim's expression grew serious. How high? Very. This is going to create a political earthquake. Then we'll deal with that earthquake, Ibrahim said firmly. No matter who's involved, justice is justice. Set up a meeting with the Attorney General tomorrow. This investigation goes wherever the evidence leads. As Okonkwo walked away to make arrangements, Ibrahim stood alone for a moment, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in the garden below, a golden ring lay in the dirt, a reminder that corruption could be fought, that truth could win, and that sometimes the most important battles began with the smallest acts of courage. He thought about that day on the sidewalk, about choosing to pick up a ring that a stranger had thrown away. It would have been easier to ignore it, to mind his own business, to stay safe in his disguise and observe without getting involved. But that wasn't why he had become president. That wasn't why he continued to fight. Despite the threats and the difficulty and the enemies he made, he had become president to serve the people, all of them, not just the powerful and wealthy, but also the street vendor, the taxi driver, the young designer with talent but no opportunities, and the woman running barefoot from a forced marriage. Their stories were his story. Their struggle was his struggle. And as long as he held office, he would never forget that. The ring was gone, discarded as it deserved to be. But its legacy remained, a reminder that change begins when someone, somewhere, decides that enough is enough. When someone has the courage to run, to speak truth, to pick up what others ignore. And sometimes, just sometimes that someone was sitting on a sidewalk, disguised as a cobbler, watching the world with the eyes of an eagle. The end.